Hey guys, DeathClock Dave here, and welcome to my first Convergence of Cyriss game log. I've been playing Warmachine Hordes for a few years, fairly casually. I picked up Convergence back in Mark II when they first came out and played them for a bit, but then went back to my Signar and Legion as my mains. I've jumped back into Convergence for probably a good portion of 2018 here. I've committed to try and play similar lists fairly consistently until I've got a good handle on them. And the purpose of these logs is really just to help me become a better player. So in the past, for past games, I've had a bad habit of playing a game and then win or lose. I tend to forget what happened in the game. I'll play the game and walk away, and then there's not a lot of reflection as to why I won or lost, mistakes that I made, maybe things that I could have done better. And I really wanted to work on that and push toward becoming a better player. So purpose of these logs is to try to keep me accountable, keep me moving forward as a player. And if these reflections can also help you guys as players, then that's awesome as well. So hopefully this can give some insight into potential matchups and such, and help you guys to avoid some of the mistakes that I make. Anybody who knows me and obviously knows my my tag of DeathClock Dave knows that I tend to play slowly, and that's been an ongoing issue for a while. And that's probably going to be a recurring theme as I progress through these game logs. I really want to work on that as I get more familiar with the faction and with the list that I'm playing. And just better in general for strategies and pre-planning my turns, that sort of thing. Probably at some point we'll switch to time turns just to keep myself accountable. So still play with the death clock, but just have like a 10-minute time turn running on my phone just to keep me more accountable with a 5-minute turn extension, likely for use on feat turn. So that's really just to help me work on clock, because oftentimes I find myself in a pretty decent position game state wise, but I've just burned so much my clock that there's no chance of me coming back. So the match for my first game was just a casual match with a buddy of mine from our local game club. So this match was actually streamed live, so you guys will be able to watch the full-length recording, and we also did a battle report recap. So if you guys want to have a look at that, I'll have that in the description for the links if you want to watch the full-length versions there or go through the more in-depth recap. The purpose of these videos is to be fairly short and sweet, so those will give you some more details into what actually happened. So obviously I was playing Convergence. My pairing was Axis and Orion, both in Destruction Initiative. My Axis list was a fairly standard Axis list with double Teps, 2 Inverters, a Cipher, Diffuser, Optifex Directive, Arc Node, and then basically a bunch of servitors. So that's really the gist of it. I also had, I believe, 8 galvanizers in my ADR. For this list, I decided, or for this particular game, I decided to stick just with my standard list without swapping anything out, just to start learning the list itself. So my opponent was playing Trollbloods. He had a Madarek 1 list, a Band of Heroes with all of the dudes, and then Kolgrima, Power of Dunia. So it's not the standard, I guess, Northkin list that people are taking with her. My opponent didn't have the Northkin models yet. So he played her under the Power of Dunia with a whole bunch of beasts. So there was a lot of beef on the board. For both sides of the board. So the scenario that we played was scenario 6, which is Recon 2. So with this scenario, there are lots of scoring elements. So you've got 2 vertically oriented rectangular zones that can be scored by Warcaster, Warlock, Warbeast, Warjack, and battle engines, of course. We've got 2 objectives, so we both chose the healing objective for this game, and then 2 flags as well, which can be scored by a Warcaster, Warlock, or solo. So just looking at the pairing and deciding what I was going to play, whenever I see Kolgrima, and if my opponent sees that I have any form of shooting whatsoever, my assumption is going to be that they're going to play Kolgrima. Kolgrima's got a very powerful feat which denies shooting, which is huge, and it's also got a scenario portion where it pushes you back 2 inches, so she's got good scenario presence that way as well, and can score by pushing your stuff out of zones and such. Having him look at my list, and he obviously would see that I've got tons of guns in my Orion list. So my Orion list is 3 assimilators, Corollary, obviously, the Cipher, a monitor, and a whole bunch of servitors, including Elimination Servitors, so tons and tons of shooting. I've also got my ADR, I've got 2 TEPs. So lots of shooting, and I've got the TEPs in my access list, so definitely thinking he's going to choose Colgrima, and he did. So I chose Axis, and the pairing ended up being Axis versus Colgrima. So I figured Axis would just be a better bet. I've got a more melee presence in that list, some good scenario game as well with his Bulldoze and with his Battering Ram spell for pushing things out of the zone. So I figured he would be a good choice. I won the roll to go first, and I decided to go second. I chose to go second primarily because I wanted the first opportunity to score. So the terrain on the table, there was a forest on the table edge that I chose that was more or less in the middle of the table, and then there was also water on the other table edge, in more or less the same spot. So I figured I would just prefer to be on this side for the scoring is really what it came down to. There was on both sides the flag was kind of partially hidden by a forest, so that was going to be a really nice spot to sit to something like a servitor for scoring. So we both have a lot of solos in our lists, which is going to mean there's definitely a lot of scenario presence for this particular matchup and this particular scenario. So my opponent deployed first, so he's got basically a big line of beasts. So he's got on his top, I guess, left flank, he's got Earthborn and the Mauler. I knew right away that the Mauler was going to be a key piece in this matchup. My armor is pretty high, and with my feet, I drop his strength, which is effectively an armor buff. And I knew the Animus from the Mauler with the +3 strength was going to be huge. So I knew, if at all possible, if the opportunity presented itself, I needed to make sure I could remove that Mauler to kind of neuter what he was able to do. So down the line, you can see the Colgrima model is actually the white proxy model in the middle of the table. So he's got Colgrima centrally so that she can be in a good position to get her feet to cover everything, basically the TEPs in this case. Down below, we've got more beasts, including Mulg. So Mulg is a beast, and he's always terrified me. Lots of nightmares from Mark II, where he killed all my stuff. So he was a worry too. So lots of beef on his side of the table, and then he's got the stone in the back to waddle forward and get everything in a juicy aura of armor. So on my side of the table, I've got my TEPs in the back, obviously. My game plan for TEP placement, I knew it was going to be inevitable that they were going to be caught under the feet, so I wanted to make sure they were in places where they were going to be relevant for the post-feet turns. I also knew I wanted to put them in such a way that my Jax and Axis could not get bumped back too far from Colgrima's feet. So my plan was to place my Jax kind of base to base with the TEPs behind them, so that when he feats, I'm not going to lose that 2 inches because probably it's going to be the case that my feet turn will be directly after his feet turn. So that way I'm not pushed back and missing that 2 inches. So I've got my Cipher and Inverter on my right flank to square off against that Mauler, trying to get a line on him. Down the line, I've just got a whack of Servitors. I've got my Diffuser central, so he can go left or right if he needs to for getting that beacon off for the +2 speed and free charge. And then I've got my Inverter on the bottom flank, just with the TEP. So with countercharge, I want to make sure that my Inverters, especially with the knockdown melee weapons, are in such a spot where they can countercharge to protect my TEPs if he happens to get anything close enough there. And then I've got Axis just beside the Corollary there to be central to skirt around that forest. So I've got to my Jax and everything that doesn't have Pathfinder kind of to the left and right to skirt that forest to get around it. But I wanted to make sure that Axis was going to be central so that I could catch everything that mattered in my feet turn when the time came. So I've got my Reflex servitors advanced deployed in positions where I can have them move forward and dig in to be in good positions for counter charges, just to try and control his board placement. And then I've got my attunement servitors kind of spread throughout my lines. I want to make sure that they're in spots where they can hand out that flare wherever it's needed. And then I ran, it's a little hard to see all three of them because the overlay is covering up part of it in the picture, but I've got 3 elimination servitors at the far left flank with the intention that they're going to run hard down that flank, maybe get in a spot where they're in the back lines and maybe shooting at the stone, possibly getting in on that flag as well, and trying to either stay out of Colgrimma's feet or maybe force her to move a little bit farther in that direction that she'd like to try to prevent the shooting there as well. So on his turn 1, he just basically ran forward, just getting everything into position. The stone does its thing. It's got some fury on it. And just runs forward. Colgrimma moved up and got 2 clouds put out, touching the house and the forest, so that she's creating a nice wall of no line of sight there. She's got a Swamp Gobber's Bellow crew, which has moved into the bottom zone, just to be in a position to pop out more clouds on the following turn, just reducing the amount of resources that Colgrimma needs to spend for that, and also has I believe that's a whelp at the bottom, moving toward that flag as well, just to get in a position for scoring. So everything really just moving up, getting into position, lots of running. And then on my turn 1, it's basically the same thing. So I've moved, I allocated out enough focus just to get my jacks up the board. I wanted to try to make sure the Corollary was full for the following turn. I cast Iron Aggression on the bottom inverter. And just got my reflex servitors. They all pretty much moved up and dug in to be in positions where they could countercharge. So I've got a couple of the reflex servitors hiding sort of behind and to the sides of the house, and also down below the forest, so that he doesn't necessarily have a direct line to me, but as soon as he comes by either of those line of sight blocking pieces of terrain, I'll have a line on him for the countercharge. So just moving forward to be dug in. He doesn't have the shooting that he's got in this list is basically sprays, with the exception of he's got Linus Rasil on the top, I believe, in the rubble, but she's also it's just a magic attack. So he actually has 0 ranged attacks in this list, so I didn't have to worry about having my servitors within 3 inches of anything for the shield guards, so that got rid of some of the kind of placement issues that I might normally face with making sure I've got shield guards nearby. So then it's just things running up, like I mentioned before, having my Teps butted up against Axis and the heavies to prevent them from being pushed back. I assumed that turn 2 was going to be Colgrimma Feet turn to make sure she caught my Teps. So it's really just positioning and also putting my jacks in places where if he does somehow get too aggressive and move really far forward, that I'll be in spots where I can countercharge. And then, of course, my elimination servitors in the bottom continue their run up the flank on the bottom left. So on his turn 2, he's basically moving forward again. He wanted to make sure that he could deny where I could see for my line of sight. So he's got he used Troll Moses to reduce the cost on his spells to get out some more clouds. So he's got 3 clouds from Colgrimma that are blocking between the forest and the house in the top, and then the forest and the house in the bottom as well. So there's probably like I don't even know what that ends up being, like a 20+ inch section of just no line of sight. So that's pretty huge. I believe I might have gotten a couple of counter charges in just to start putting a bit of damage on his stuff as they came in. But line of sight is obviously an issue. Colgrimma did indeed feat. She pushed some of my stuff back. That's getting rid of the dug in on my servitors that were dug in, pushing back the stuff that wasn't butted up against the Teps. I believe the only thing that wasn't caught in the feat were, I believe there were 2 of the elimination servitors down at the bottom that weren't caught, and then my, I think my mechanics and that was pretty much it. Maybe a couple of servitors up at the very top flank there. So kind of played out as expected. Cloud Wall is a pain in the butt, but what can you do? And my Teps are not going to be able to shoot this turn, so it's just going to be a matter of putting them in spots where they'll be able to make a difference on the following turn. So on my turn two, first thing I did is I made a bit of a mistake with with activating Axis before I activated the Corollary. So I was trying to remember to do that, but obviously when you activate the Corollary first and he's within 3 inches of the caster, he gets an extra focus. So I allocated out my focus. I knew this was going to be my feet turn. He had put that Mauler pretty far forward. If you look at where he is in position to where my jacks were previously. So I wanted to take that opportunity to get rid of that Mauler if at all possible. And then just move forward, make sure I was in commanding position for counterattack, and also keep swinging some solos toward his flag. This is also going to be a scoring turn, so I wanted to make sure I put a solo on my flag to make sure that that I scored there, and make sure that I had at least something contesting his flag as well, and obviously in the top zone. So I had my Iron Aggression upkept. I moved Axis forward. And in the previous turn, I had also measured out and made sure that my stuff was out of range of the Mauler, of the Earthborn on the top flank, because where he initially was, he was going to be getting a speed boost from the terrain. He also has access to Rush, and then also Lanissa, so that was potentially plus 6 inches of movement with a free charge, which I think put his threat at about 15 inches or so. So I had to move my jacks back just far enough to make sure I wasn't going to get charged by an Earthborn. On my turn, on his turn, sorry. I've got the Iron Aggression upkept. I moved the Inverter forward on the bottom. Moved my my Tep forward. I guess Axis had gone first and feeded, so everybody's getting the speed buff. Axis had moved forward and feeded. I probably got a little bit too greedy in terms of how far forward I moved. I really just needed to make sure that I was catching the beasts. That was the big thing, to make sure that they couldn't get a good alpha on me. So he's probably a little bit farther forward than he needed to be. And so I knew I wanted to make sure that the Mauler died, so I had I can't remember if I did it from the Corollary or if I allocated it out, but I made sure that the Inverter on the top and the Cipher were filled up and ready. So the Inverter was able to go in and do some good damage and take out that Mauler. So I believe I was actually, with the line of sight blocking with the clouds, I was able to actually just walk forward with the speed bonus from the feet and get into range. Obviously doing the knockdown shot first. I probably also got an Attunement Servitor. Oh no, the Attunement Servitors wouldn't have been able to shoot this turn, so they were just really getting in the way. So managed to take out the Mauler with the Inverter. The Cipher, I believe, just ended up moving forward to get into position, and then everything else was pretty much just positioning. So his speed was going to be really neutered on the next turn, so he's speed 5 on everything except for Maul, which is speed 4, so it's -2 speed, so stuff's going to be slow. It's not going to be able to charge or trample or slam or anything. So I proceeded to put Servitors in the way as much as possible. So I basically just put them in spots where he was going to have to deal with them to try to even move forward. I made sure my Servitors on the bottom flank were close enough to continue contesting his flag, and I made sure that my Servitor was also on my flag at the top, so that I would be scoring. And I apologize guys, I believe a couple of these, the increment for the turn counters and the scoring may be a little bit off on the screen there. So on my opponent's turn, let's just see, that was the end of turn 2. I do believe so. My opponent, for the counterattack, he did lots of kind of sitting in the tank trying to figure out what he was going to do. It's Axis's feat is a big control thing for sure, and it causes lots of issues. So he is putting out. He moved forward as much as he could. Couldn't get a lot of work done. He jammed up a couple of whelps down below or up at the right flank to get in the way of my my right inverter. Put down the clouds to try and continue to block the line of sight. And that prevented me from doing any countercharge shenanigans, and really just moving forward. I think he was pretty put off by the feat and how much it neutered what he was able to do, and it was also helping to make sure I was scoring, because it was hard for him to get anything far enough forward. So I was going to be able to score on my flag again. So everything just really positioning, just kind of taking the feat as best they can and getting in a spot where they'll be able to get work done on the next turn. While trying to prevent my counter-attacking with the clouds in the way. So on my turn, I put the 2 jacks into the top zone. So my plan was to clear out that Earthborn and also clear out Lanissa to make sure I was able to score in that zone. So I was able to clear that zone and leave my servitor sitting on my flag. So just got some flares off and continued to position things around. I got the Elimination Servitors that had been doing some hard flanking down to take some pot shots at the stone to start killing off some of those members. And this is where I was getting pretty low on time, and I was excited that I was going to be able to use my TEP. So this was going to be my first time ever using a TEP for shooting. So so I think I got a little bit blinded by that. I was in a really commanding position scenario-wise, and so rather than focusing on that aspect and focusing on the attrition that I'd put forward already, I moved forward. I believe I went forward with my bottom inverter first to try to get some damage on Mulg. Then I realized that I had, for my left TEP, I hadn't put my servitors in good spots for being able to shoot at Mulg, and I didn't move forward. I could have moved forward just a bit, just to be towing into the cloud, so I could have shot. So I ended up landing my TEP in a position where the only option to try to take out Mulg was to shoot at my own jack and put a bunch of damage on my own jack, because of course I'm putting multiple dice into the damage rolls. And just in general, spending a lot of time on that left flank, when what I should have done is I should have just pressed forward with that left flank, got my inverter in, got the TEP up there, jammed a bunch of servitors in, so that it would have been next to impossible for him to clear that zone. Had things close enough to his flag so he wouldn't be able to score, and move Axis back. So you can see Axis is directly behind the bottom TEP. I could have just moved Axis back, made sure he was safe, and kept steamrolling with this scenario. But I got a bit too focused on doing the attacks on the bottom flank, and I also probably could have gotten both my TEPs into a position where I could have been shooting at his objective. I kind of lost sight that the objective was even there, when I probably could have, if I had moved properly. Probably both TEPs could have gotten shots on the objectives if I had positioned things in such a way that I could have been shooting at them. So that very well there could have won me the game, bumping me up to the 5th point. But I basically forgot that the objective was there. So definitely an oversight on my part. So and I believe I ended that turn on, it was like, I think I ended my turn on 15 seconds or something like that, or it was not enough. It was less than 15 seconds. So with the current steamroller rules, it was not enough time to actually finish off a full turn. So so at that point, I had lost the game. Clocked over to my opponent, and he was able to play out his turn. And for the moral victory, when he moved something forward, I did a counter charge with my Corollary and did a whack of damage, but at that point it didn't matter, and I actually clocked on my opponent's turn. So definitely need to work on speeding up that game. So this was my first game with Convergence. So so the big thing is that the The induction kind of blows my mind a bit, trying to figure out what needs to flow through to where, particularly with the melee heavies, and making sure they land in places where they're going to be within 6 inches to induct. And also just getting tunnel vision in terms of making attacks and doing things that I don't need to be doing. I really need to be focusing on the activations that matter, because in this matchup I probably could have easily scored up and put myself in a position where it was going to be very difficult for my opponent to get any further points, and then I would be able to clear zones either just with attacks or if I cast 4 bulldoze and just push stuff out of the zone. So that was my first game, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I apologize for the mistakes that I made. Definitely a learning process, and look forward to seeing you guys for the next game log. Take care.